It's Thursday, the 2nd of April. This is the live show from Travel Massive. It's the community's response to the COVID-19 crisis on the travel industry. This is the 5th episode we've put together since we started broadcasting this around the time we should have all been in Berlin for ITB. This is our episode called Grounded. It's a theme about how the aviation business is coping with the downturn, the obvious downturn in demand for airfare as a result of the crisis. We've all started an evolution in terms of our behaviors over the last few weeks. Every week I try and recap just where we were when we started. We didn't all expect to be in quarantine. Some countries are completely locked down. This morning, Japan shut its borders officially with 73 countries. We're heading for about 1 million cases worldwide. The US now tops the polls in terms of tested, confirmed cases for COVID-19. The death toll just keeps going up and up. The statistics are just getting crazy. So this is about the time that we recorded this show. It's about week 5 for us here for the Travel Massive team. This is produced from Bulgaria by Maria Stoyanova, from Tasmania with a little bit of help from Ian Cumming, the founder of Travel Massive. It's hosted by myself, Kevin O'Shaughnessy from City Hook here in Dublin. And joining me from Seattle is Timothy O'Neill Dunn. From Malmo is Anne Cederhall, and from the UK is Madeleine Anderson. I'm so glad to have you all on board. We'll be talking to each of them one at a time to talk a little bit about their perspectives on the travel business. But one of the drivers, excuse me, one of the big drivers, if you think about it as an indicator or a source of downstream demand on travel, is aviation. If people are flying, they'll be, in our case, using taxis, they'll be staying in hotels, they'll be consuming tour and activity products. Aviation is a pretty good indicator of where we are as a business. And for the last few years, it's been going up and up and up. It is the key driver for growth, or the key indicator for growth, depending on which way you're looking at the statistics. One of the first guests I want to talk to is Timothy O'Neill Dunn. He's a 40-year travel tech veteran. He is 4 times longer in the travel technology business than myself. He was one of the original team behind Expedia, the board of directors from a local company in Dublin called OpenJaw. There isn't very much that he hasn't lived through technology-wise in the travel business. He's pretty much seen it all. Today he runs a fund, an investment company called 777 Partners. But Timothy, I wanted to bring you on because you have some pretty strong views about where aviation is today. But I want to rewind the clock a little bit to a frame of reference that we might be able to think back to. Another big tragedy, of course, was 2001, and it's one of those moments where we start defining modern aviation from a passenger experience perspective, at least. Starting there was a huge overnight impact on aviation as a result of the terrorist attacks. There was such an impact on aviation that you had climatologists out studying what the sky looked like without contrails. What was the impact then, so we can get the frame of reference? How bad was it when we talk about post 9/11 aviation?
I think that people look at shocks that occur in the system, and 9/11 was definitely a shock because aviation was one of the instruments of what happened. But it's not the only one. After 9/11, surprisingly, the bounce back was relatively quickly. The government stepped in, people did a lot of things as if you like, a community. And the return to normal took only about a year before things were always back to normal. In fact, in terms of traffic, what you saw perhaps more than anything else after 9/11 was a rationalization of the industry. It started the change of the end of independent smaller carriers to these more conglomerate carriers. So I think that you have to look at other shocks to the system when actually the system was shut down. That occurred in 1981 with the PATCO air traffic controller strike, where things were down for a couple of days. But there's been other shocks to the system. I think that the difference today is this is a shock with no end that is clear. So the lack of clarity of what's going on is something that was not expected. So you start off in the first thing is, I call this the 7 stages to the new normal. And in the 7 stages to the new normal, the interesting thing was the first stage is denial. and denial existed for about 4 weeks to 6 weeks. And during that time, what we heard was a completely different story, which is, oh, it's Chinese, don't worry about it, guys. That's fine.
It felt like SARS version 1 again. It was
it was like, it's going to be handled the same way. You're right. And that it's going to be handled the same way means it's going to be localized in its impact. Whereas 9/11 was a global impact, but it was relatively short. We're now dealing with the worst of those cases, which is it's not localized and it's long. And my thesis is that in these 7 stages to the new normal, it's going to take at least 18 months for us to get there. That means you wipe out everything that's going to occur in 2020, and you see most of that has now already taken place. But it also asks, when do you think there'll be any form of normalcy coming back? And that, in our view, is not going to happen maybe until June of next year, but probably not until the 3rd and 4th quarter of next year.
So when we're talking about normal, does that mean a return to normal operations, or does it mean a return to normal levels of demand, meaning what we had 2 months ago on track?
Absolutely not the latter, and a different state for the former. Okay,
so there are different events for different reasons. There's new ceremonies at the airport. We can't carry a lot of liquids. That happened in my lifetime. There's more airport scanners. Again, that happened.
Take your shoes off.
Yeah, take your shoes off because somebody tried to blow up a plane with their shoes. Okay, like these things happen now because of different events. Do you see a different airport experience as a result?
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk about that? Yeah.
Oh, you give me such an opportunity. Thank you, Kevin. I think the difficulty is that in today's world of an airport, you have a single point of streaming, which is the security checkpoint. And so you have the airport workers are secure and the passengers are secure. The trouble is that creates a choke point of where there are a lot of people. And if you try to say what's going to happen with those people, that's a festering petri dish of potential people who are sick. We've got to create a buffer zone between that. What we're calling a safe flight protocol is going to have to be in place, because you cannot bring into the aviation system, the air transportation system, a disease of any sort. So the only way to do that is to create, in effect, a cordon around the airport. And that means that people will not be allowed into the airport unless they have been tested. And currently, I just checked about an hour ago with the FDA and CDC, there is no approved instant test for the virus. As a result, there is going to be no easy way to restore until we have some form of instant test. And that means the people who are allowed into the airport will be considered to be unclean. I saw WestJet release something last night that said, yes, we've got social distancing on planes. We're saying that you won't have somebody sitting next to you. Well, that's at least 30 to 40% of a plane's capacity that will no longer be utilized. I don't think that's an economic decision, nor is it smart
at all. Timothy, you can't.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, and that's one model where we try and have social distancing on aircraft, and we're all flying.
It's not practical.
Yeah, I don't think so. Like it's just not. It's not green. It's not effective. It's not cost effective for airlines, and we'd be paying 4 times as much. It's crazy. But you raised an interesting point that this could be an extra step at security, except it shouldn't be, because on one level you want the airport staff and the pilots and the crew to be safe, and I think they have a certain entitlement to be. But also passengers won't fly unless they know they're safe as well. So what you're talking about is kind of like a pre-security clearance. It's not.
Let's call it a health cordon. Okay. That only people who've passed through the health cordon and have proved that they are safe, however that is done, and I have thoughts on that subject, but only then would it be possible to permit people into the secure part of the aircraft, of the airline, which is the airport.
There's the regulation side where you mentioned the FDA hasn't approved something that is, and look, it's a huge market. It'll be a big part of the influence for the growth of the space again. We're looking at a story though where Abbott recently announced, and it made mainstream media eventually, that they have a 5-minute test Is there a certain, so technology hopefully will go faster and faster, that it'll just mean maybe we'll get it down to a minute or, you know, pseudo instant, while you wait kind of story. But you've got the technology on one side, you've got regulation in the middle, but you've got passenger feeling on the other side. In the same way that there was fear of flying after 9/11, from my memory, do you think that there'll be fear of flying because of the virus, in spite of the test or the testing that you're proposing for passengers once we get through this? Is that going to be a big factor?
I think so. So you've got to think of the stimulus of what you do to get over that. And economic is one, but it is a degree of assurance that says that when you enter into this system, it will be secure. But you have additional layers. The additional layers aren't just the human sensitivity to this, which you saw. I mean, for those of us who were around and deeply involved in aviation at the time, people will remember September the 11th, 2002, when there was a rumor going around that there was going to be a copycat attack on that day. And airlines, in fact, basically canceled most of their flights that day. I remember I deliberately flew that day. I flew from Vegas back to Seattle, and there were 16 people in the aircraft. So we all sat up front and had a great old drinking time all the way from Vegas. We partied all the way back. And I took a picture, unfortunately I've lost it apparently, of the back of the aircraft where there was nobody. The entire back of the aircraft was vacant.
So there's the passenger kind of emotion that we do need to address as an industry, and I think we'll get there. In different models, and you were talking about numbers from the 9th of March, that given the probability of a return to normal, at least say normal operations, that it might come back within 12 weeks. We have a 1 in 5 chance of that happening, that it'll come back within 26 weeks. We've got maybe a 40% chance of that happening, but more likely, and it's increasing all the time, that it'll be back to normal in 2 years' time.
I want to say, Kevin, that was the numbers I gave you last week. I decided that what I would do is go out and poll it, and there's no possibility of the 12-week. That's just gone. The 26-week is now down to, I think, maybe 10%. And let me use China as a benchmark for this. So China started this allegedly in December, although there's some anecdotal evidence that the virus actually started in November. So you look at till what date did they respond, and it took them all of December and most of January, so a good 6 to 8 weeks before they even imposed anything. When it came to February, they still started February with a full deck. They canceled 60% of the flights on the schedule. But strangely enough, I looked at the delivery. They only delivered 15% of the entire previous year's schedule in terms of the number of passengers in February of 2020 compared to 2019. So I think that a lot of people assumed that this would be, that's what I call stage 1 is the denial, is you don't do anything. You just say, yeah, maybe I can adjust a flight or two, but I'm not going to really do anything. When it hit, which is stage 2, which is the OMG panic, that's when you saw the cut down in schedules. And we've just kind of basically finished that phase. In fact, we may have finished stage 3, which is repatriation. We have never had that situation before. That is unique, that people have said, I need to go home, and governments arranged for people to go home. And as you said, Japan's just put up its borders. Effectively, cross-border travel has ceased. There is none. So we're at that stage now. That is a totally unique world.
It is truly unprecedented. It's even, look, I'm not going to try and top that, Timothy. There's something very, very scary in that when we think about it. To echo your 2-year sentiment, just to give them a shout out, Arrival gave a minimum of 2 years for recovery back to 2019 levels. It looks like even based on your assessment, it might be even longer. It could take up to 3 years.
I don't think we will ever see air transport at the same level ever again. I think it is the significance of this is we have passed that peak. And until the population catches up, our best guess in 2 years is about 75%. And thereafter, that's going to be kind of the benchmark. So 75% of 2019, we're not looking until maybe 3 to 5 years in that window before we'll reach the same levels of traffic. And that's based upon what we know of the 3 types of traffic, which is corporate and leisure, which of course everybody knows. But there is another one, which is a very dominant form in many parts of the world, and that's visiting friends and relatives, VFR. So that is going to be one of the big defining moments, is that people have now moved to digital, and they're quite more comfortable that they don't have to have the frequency of visits. They don't have to go and actually engage in that. The move to digital, particularly the Zoom effect, if you like, as this conference is about, you'll see that emerging as a good enough reason for us to do this. We've got the technologies now. It's good enough that we can interact with people. And guess what? We now have learned behavior that says, I am quite comfortable in doing this. I don't need to travel as much as I did before.
Is it the end? I'm thinking if there's lower demand, or if there's lower activity for a number of years, does that mean, at least for you, that from your perspective, that we're looking at a lot of airframes sitting around doing nothing?
So currently, the number that was projected, I think from one of the investment firms earlier this week, said there's 2,700 airframes that don't have a flying possibility. That doesn't include the ones which are going to be permanently parked. KLM has just parked its last 747, big tier, I'm a Queen lover. I think you're going to see a lot of very different things. And if you take this time period of, let's say it is a 5-year change, and I realize that that may sound shocking to people, but just go with me. 5 years, you're going to see technologies which will make certain parts of the airline industry obsolete. And by that, I mean particularly short-haul travel, where think of the benchmark, which is a 50-seater aircraft going 200 or 300 miles or 3 hours driving time. I believe that they will emerge in the 5-year window, which would make a lot of the short-haul regional traffic completely change. Yes, lots of airframes sitting in the desert.
So one of the things actually that Christoph Muller said on the Flight Global conference this morning, the little panel with Christoph Muller, Tony Tyler, and others, was that it's a moment to start consolidating, to start cleaning up balance sheets, to retire old aircraft like the 747s you mentioned there for KLM.
Yeah, they would say that now, wouldn't they?
What's your feeling on how can, well, I'm assuming that airlines will find a way to be profitable with lower demand. That's not going to change, but is there capital restrictions on that? Are we looking at a different business model that we'll have to look at? Are low cost going to collapse? Who are the real casualties in this situation? I assume that we'll still have air travel, but it'll be lower demand. But what will really change?
So first of all, I think the new normal is, let's just take the global airline industry revenue. It's $900 billion a year. That was the projected value for this year. That number is not going to be the same. There's a lot of places, and Anne, I'm sure, can talk to this much better than I can, is that we're going to see a different set of economic models emerge. One of the things that you will see is whether or not the standard model of what are the 3 big costs of an airline, and we could talk about this at great length, but let me distill it down to this answer to your question, which is, I think that those people who are heavily invested in metal are going to be in deep caca. Those people who've got ownership of large assets, being the metal itself, be it an engine or an airframe, they are in trouble. We're going to see massive cancellations. The order books, you know, the 5,000 737s that are on order, the similar number of A320s that are in order, 1,000 787s an order, those numbers will evaporate. And that places a completely different perspective on what's there. Remember that if you were to stop travel today, as you have done, could we continue to fly people around the world? The answer to that question is absolutely yes. And the reason for that is we're doing it today. We've stopped delivery of what was to be the most popular aircraft on the planet, which was the Boeing 737 MAX. That has been grounded for over a year, and the industry ran. So the fact that you can actually make do with what's in place today is an indication of what happens when you take that pressure out of the system. And there is no longer a pressure to deliver a new aircraft. And the marginal differences in let's call it green, between a 737 MAX and a 737-800 is maybe 15%. Is that a good enough reason for us to go ahead and wholesale move and support the existing economic model? I'm afraid the answer to that question is no.
Is there going to be an impact, question from Jack Loop there on chat, and for anybody watching us on YouTube Live or on Facebook, the only place to reach us is during the call on Zoom. Head on over to travelmassive.com to put your question to us. Maria will get it to me for the panelists. But question from Jack Loop, one of many from him actually.
Hi, Jack.
The question he had was really around the low cost experience. Does it mean that they'll, look, if it's an NG or a 320 aircraft, I'm sure it's the same, but does it mean that they're just going to pack more passengers on board to try and get more margin? Is it a shift then, maybe from my perspective, is it more towards ancillary revenue? What are the dynamics to be like if it's going to be at a lower volume?
I'm afraid I have to challenge the question a bit, which is the delta between, small d, between a low-cost carrier and a full-service carrier has been diminishing for some time.
And I'd agree with that. Yeah.
So the definition of which model survives, I think the only model that survives is a profitable one, or one that's got a government behind it. That just changes the whole complexity of where we are. I think if I look backwards and say, those carriers who were able to extract cost out of their system, the airlines did a fabulous job since 2011 of rebuilding their balance sheets. You have low-cost carriers like Ryanair and EasyJet who have balance sheets which are way stronger than many legacy carriers. I think that you've got to say that there isn't going to be a singular definable model that will emerge. You'll just have profitable airlines and subsidized airlines. And that's when the question comes in as to what is the mission of the country in which the airline operates. Is that an economic value to the country, and what does it do for economic health and welfare? So I don't really see that there's a difference. I think that the only winners are going to be low-cost winners. And when I say low cost, I mean low cost. Strangely enough, one of the lowest cost operators is a former client of mine, which is Aegean Airways. And Aegean Airways has the lowest cost of any full service carrier. You look at, let's say, Eurowings, which is got one of the highest cost of any LCC. It's way higher than BA. So you kind of look at what is the delta between what these definitions are of low cost versus full service. And one final point is one of the airlines that has the highest cost of any in the US in terms of cost per available seat kilometer or available seat mile is Southwest. And Southwest has a very high cost of doing business, surprisingly, even though it's very efficient.
There's something that the airlines...
You almost sound depressed. Those pauses make you sound depressed, Kevin.
Well, I'm trying to frame this the right way, because I was hoping, Timothy, I'll level with you. I was hoping that we'd be looking at a rosier picture, but you have a very sober outlook. Like, number one, we'll be flying again quickly, but or as quickly as possible, but the volumes will be completely different. Probably a different flying experience.
I don't even agree that we're going to be flying quickly. I think it's going to be some time before we have anything other than what I would call essential travel. Yeah.
As in something that's been mandated or approved by a government.
Correct.
Yeah. But it'll be a while. So in your view, that we'll be casually booking on an Aer Lingus or a Ryanair flight out of Dublin. Just to go back to your model, and I do
think
want
that
to.
the name of the airline is going to be called Air Ryan.
They tried that for a few times, in fact. The safe flying protocol is something that you've kind of floated here. I know it's something you're working on. It's got me very, very excited, for one, because it seems to suggest that if we alter, like we have in the past, if we alter the airport experience, we might be able to get back in the air sooner. When you talk about a recovery of 18 months, 2 years, 3 to 5 years, is it slower without that health screening, in your view? We're not
I think it's
epidemiologists
impossible
here, but is it possible to recover without that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think you've pointed out the two factors, which is the airline itself. I know that the AFA, which is the American Flight Attendants Association, which is the union that covers most of the flight attendants in the United States, they've been pleading for PPE, personal protection equipment, and they don't get it, and they won't get it. So you now have situations of flight attendants who have been flying, who got sick and were asymptomatic and spread the disease. So that's part of the problem. And I call this one of the two big lies at the moment, is that don't test until you're symptomatic. Of course, that's complete nonsense. Everybody should be tested as much as possible. Yeah. And there is no universal protocol for testing. All the testing that is taking place right now is asynchronous. It is happening in the background. There is no instant test. As I said, I checked with the CDC, and they have not approved any instant tests at all. So until we solve the problem of the air transportation system being safe, countries will not permit planes to go from country A to country B unless people are tested. And they won't allow people to get on the plane. So this is part of the new normal. The new normal is you will be health screened whether you like it or not, even long after this particular virus has gone away. It was mooted during the HIV crisis that was something, because everybody was afraid, was HIV spread from toilet seats or was it spread from droplets in the air? Yeah. This is an aerosol spread disease. Yeah. Therefore, anybody who is close to you could be a potential carrier, even if they actually have the antibodies in themselves. They could be spreading the disease. So until that issue is resolved, and until you build a safety zone around, first of all, the aircraft, then the people who get on the aircraft, which is both the passengers and the crew and the airport workers, and then the airport, you realize that the only place you can put this protocol cordon is around the airport. Once you have that and you have safety, then you can open up borders again, because people can fly, and people can fly with a degree of safety. But I will admonish everybody with one simple statement. You're only as good as your last test. The instant you were last tested is the only time you can certify that that person is clean of the virus or has got the antibodies.
So there's one last question I want to put to you, Timothy. Now, we're live until the top of the hour, but we might go on over the hour if anybody wants to hang on. So I'll bring in our extra guests, and we might go back to Timothy at the end. But there is one question that came in from the floor again. Paul Byrne, lovely to see you online. Thanks for joining. And it's a question I had as well, so it jumped out as a reminder. Look, the 787 in Asia was a pretty big deal. It was the birth of the low-cost, long-haul model, where you could fly long distances, kind of in that profitable low-cost style. Scoot is one brand that comes to mind for me in that category. Is this
actually they're the only LCC who've taken the 787 in Asia? So.
And that's why I thought of it actually. The Max and the 320LR was another one, but. Is this the end of long-haul low-cost?
I think this is the same question that Jack raised, which is there, people still want to keep these labels in place. And in my view, those labels no longer are relevant. Yeah. So the question of whether Singapore Airlines is strong, the answer is yes. I think you heard on the IATA FGA call, Flight Global call this morning, that in fact they said, here is an airline who's got its act together as a group. And Campbell Wilson, who is the returning CEO of Scoot, he and I have had many discussions about this, and I believe that long haul, low cost makes sense because people will have to travel. And when they do, they're going to be making the economic decision first before they look at brand and other attributes. So the cost factor and your ability to deliver into the marketplace the lowest cost fare, the lowest fare for the customer at an economic rate, notice I didn't say profitable, is the critical factor. And I think that's where those companies which are able to produce a low cost rate, and Scoot was definitely one of them because they were way at the bottom of the pile of even some of the LCCs. You look at also another one of our client airlines in the Value Alliance, which is Cebu Pacific, who has really probably the lowest cost of any LCC at the moment. Those are the carriers who will be able to provide that capability and service. And let me just add one other thing. So Cebu Pacific has the highest density of any wide body on the planet. They have managed on an Airbus 330-300 to get 436 passengers. They're moving that to, I think it's 472 on the 330neo.
Wow.
And that's something that's going to exist.
Well, it's, it's possible, but when you hear it happen, that's another story. Timothy, thank you for joining us. We have one question for you at the end, and we might spill off into the next hour for anybody that wants to stay on.
I may have to go and keep my dog quiet in a minute. She's barking out there. So yes, go talk to somebody
I think
else.
it's good timing. But before we bring on Anne Cederhall, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us. If you've just joined us, this is the live show from Travel Massive, broadcast live from Dublin, and today from Seattle, Malmo, and the UK. It's produced by Maria and Ian from the Travel Massive team, and it's our way of getting together to talk about how different parts of the travel industry, one of the world's largest employers, if not the world's largest employer, is coping with the COVID-19 crisis. And Cederhall has a long time history of corporate travel, meaning business travel, and working directly with airlines like Lufthansa, the Scandinavian air system, as well as low-cost carriers. Anne's pedigree is in a part of the travel business called distribution. It's what happens between when an airline wants to sell a flight and when you buy it, and it means a world of different ways of getting access to airfare. It's one of those jargon terms that exists. It's wildly complicated. And I think it's actually a very, very interesting thing to be studying today. So Anne Cederhall from Malmo, thank you so much for joining us on Travel Massive Live Show. Thank you for joining us. One of the things that stood out for me is that, and it's a trend that we've had both on this show and in my private conversations for the last few weeks, there's a feeling that we've stopped. We've had to stop, we've stopped. And there's a temptation to think of the future, of where we can go now. You stood out as having a very bold outlook and looking at this as in terms of never waste a crisis. What should airlines be doing right now that they're grounded and it's time for them to be looking at maybe new projects? What should they be doing right now?
Yes, Kevin, they could, of course, just go back and say, no, we can't do anything. We're just going to, manage the crisis the best we can, right? And sort of almost go into panic mode or whatever. But I really personally think that they should make the most of the crisis because it is a great opportunity and there is and like you said, distribution is cost for an airline. And something else, well, if we start with the airline, what they need to do, I think they should regroup, they should revise their, I can see that my internet connection. Is it okay?
When you drop out too badly, we'll stop you. Don't worry. You're so far it's a little.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Yes, there are too many people on the internet right now. I think it's 75% increase, right, of social media at the moment. So it's even though I'm on 5G, it's challenging.
It's not a good picture for how 5G was promised.
No,
sorry. We're promised something an awful lot better than this. Anyway.
No, I think airlines should. They should really try to, well, if we start with them, I think they should reach out maybe to startups. Maybe they haven't got, the funds or the money to work with startups, but make it attractive to work with them. Maybe, an airline logo is always interesting. And I can give an example. I mean, I know some companies who are in CDP and data mining, etc. They have very few airline logos. They have big logos in other corporations. Now is the time to say, can we, do something together and test something? Well, maybe not right now because we're not flying, right? But sort of plan, what can we do? And I think also they need to revise processes. Are we working in the best way? Of course, is this really, I mean, like, I'm bold. So what is it that our customers do not like? What are they unhappy about? And we could take that, of course, a step further, saying if, for instance, this is just an example, if reissue is such a complex and complicated process, why don't we try to get rid of it? Can we do something differently? I mean, we should be able to try to do this.
We use terms like to check in.
Yeah,
still.
exactly.
We
Exactly.
put, we took out the paper ticket. We made it possible to check in at home.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I have an awful frog in my throat all of a sudden.
No worries. But do we actually need a ticket?
No, do we need a ticket? No, but we kind of kept the old archaeological artifact of the ticket, and we left it, and we turned it digital. We turned it into a 2D barcode.
Yeah.
But it's still a ticket, and we still have the concept of a check-in, even though we don't really check in anymore. Like we might drop off our bags, but we don't really have to. So when you talk about reissue, you're talking about the world of complicated processes around the change itinerary.
Exactly. We talk about all these endless, we always raise our hand and say, oh, it's so complicated. It's always been this way. We can't do this because of, interlining, for example, is another good topic. We've been talking about it since 2012. Can we get an NDC verb for this? I mean, forget that, it just skip that and just get on with it and try to do something. And actually,
general understanding of this. So the term interlining means that if you book between
between airlines
and Dublin, and there isn't a direct flight, and you have to hop through New York, and it's on the same ticket, that's an interlined ticket. Timothy famously has a virtualization for that in the past with airline.
And virtual interlining is a great concept.
And Kiwi have their own version of it to do that kind of virtually as an insurance product. But the notion then around this concept of new distribution, if you think of every startup that's pitched you an idea to be in a travel product through the years, the term distribution will always come up going, where are you, and this is the term that you'll use, where are you getting your content from? Who's going to sell you tickets, or who's going to allow you to sell their tickets? The industry body, on behalf of the airlines that are part of that body, came up with this new protocol called New Distribution Capability, and we've laughed about it, and we've adopted it, and we've taken it new places. And to your point there, you're saying this is a moment where we can clean up shop. We can take out all the old cruft we don't like in the business and just throw it out. So why don't we just take this thing that we have and extend it to do the stuff that we want? What's holding us back, Anne? What? And I need you to talk for a minute while I cough.
No, I think we've been held back by this whole way of thinking that we've always done it this way and we have to do it this way. And we've got, like, typically in an airline, you have 60 systems that you integrate and you act together. And, it would be too complicated to change the way we do revenue accounting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the list is endless of the we can't do it because, this is the way we've always done it. And like I said, I think this is the time to, like I said, you need to reach out to startups. You need to do an inventory, look at what are these guys doing. You need to look at your processes. Do we actually need, 60 systems? You also need to revise the contracts you have. Are they too long? Is it a time to renegotiate? Perhaps is it, time to do it differently? And definitely look at the processes and the way you work with agents as well. TMCs, travel management companies.
So today, your role, your official title is consultant. You help airlines and companies in that ecosystem work together. What are you hearing from airlines about how it's affecting them on an operational basis? How are they spending the days at the moment?
Oh, there are of course, I hear many things. I hear those who are doing exactly what I'm advising them to do. And I hear of those saying that, no, it cannot be done. You know, let's just go back and bury ourselves and resurface when time comes. And another interesting point is coming back to the agency environment, where I would really like to stress on something or point something out. If 9/11 brought us the attention that we need to have duty of care systems for corporations, for anybody traveling, we need to know where they are. And this is what was the revolution, you could say.
I need to pause you on that because it's something that's overlooked in so many different types of travel. When you think about when I fly, look, it's a small company, duty of care, it's there, but it's not the same. You know, when you employ somebody, generally employment law says that you have to take care of them when they're traveling.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you let them book their own travel and they've booked on some, you know, and there's on some sort of crazy mode of transport, maybe it's not air, they're going on a boat and a train, are they covered by the travel policy? What's the insurance coverage there? Does our insurance policy cover that?
Exactly.
And then they're staying in an Airbnb in a shared, and you're trying to think, what is the liability story on that?
Exactly.
And the bread and butter, if I could say that, the driver behind corporate travel, it's about a third, maybe half of the business, is just making sure that that one checkbox is covered. That duty of care for your remote staff it's okay.
It's the biggest responsibility.
We overlook it when you're talking about leisure travel all the time, and it's lifeblood to corporate travel.
And airlines typically overlook, they don't really understand the need of duty of care. I mean, I've worked for several airlines there where you sort of, you really don't understand what it's all about. But what I want to say with COVID-19 is that it has put the light on how dysfunctional the systems that we're working with actually are. And they're simply not living up to the expectations because, like you're saying, people book their own travel. They will have, let's say, a low-cost carrier booked in a segment. And it's absolutely horrific when you go out there and see that this information is passed over into systems, into duty of care systems, into even GDSs as just informational segments or information, you know. And what happens with that schedule change? What happens when, I mean, the passenger is not necessarily where he is supposed to be according to that system that you have. And here I see an asynchronous system, and there is a lot to be done on the corporate side of travel here. And for airlines to better understand it. Yeah.
Airlines need distribution. They can't do it all themselves. NDC was part of changing the dialogue and changing the dynamics in that space. You were saying that there's calls for, at least from some opinions over the last few weeks, to try and centralize everything into one source of truth. But you shocked me by saying that people expected that to be outside of the airline in the distribution system.
Yes, they do.
Again.
And it shocks me that they're not really familiar and not really aware of how it works or doesn't work in today's environment. And this is really, I mean, it's really been brought up as something extremely important. And we need a single source of truth. And should that be from the passenger or the corporation, or, you know, both, or should they be linked? But you need to bring in all your travel, and you can't have, I'm sorry, but you can't have the GDS as a single source of truth. It's not possible. GDS is just a booking functionality. That's all it is.
At the same time, we can't imagine a world without, you know, multiple distribution channels. You know, it's a way, when things are okay, it's a way of hedging risk. You know, God knows somebody kicks over the the connection to the servers on the airline or whatever, you know, something metaphorically goes wrong with the e-commerce function and it fails, or, you know, a GDS channel goes down, or the meta search companies stop driving you, whatever, something will go wrong. It's nice to hedge. It's nice to get different sources of demand as well. Will the first shoots of recovery come through these exotic channels, or will they come direct to airline? I know it might be against what Timothy was thinking, it might be government only for the time being, but do we see the first shoots coming through those channels first, maybe?
It really is $1 million question, but I would really like to see that we will have, you know, aggregators or people bringing together. It's not so much about the technology, because the technology is good as such in many ways, but it's also processes. And that's actually something, coming back to airlines, that they should look into. What are their processes? What they're doing? Is it so? I'll give you another example. Is it really worthwhile for every airline to pay an intermediary to check the fares of another airline? Is that really, I mean, is there a point? I know I really, being very bold here, but I really don't see much point. I see it as a bit antiquated, and should we really move away? And I agree, either we will have, you know, airlines that are sort of government subsidized, and then of course we will have the other profitable airlines. I totally agree with Timothy there, but I do feel that an airline that can, you know, set up an agenda now and say, we will look into all our processes, and this goes actually for agencies as well. Are we handling this? And the companies, I think, that will benefit are those working best as a partnership and in that relationship with both airlines, agencies, and all other essential players.
And there's an opportunity here for change to really accelerate digital transformation.
It certainly is. And that digital transformation, I think, is key, right? That's what's going to change it all, because it's been so massive, this digital transformation that we see. And I like to say, I know I rattled Timothy there, but, and don't think outside the box. Think as if the box doesn't exist altogether. Just skip the boxes. Just start thinking about the processes and how you can change it for the better.
Now, and before I bring in Madeleine, who's been waiting patiently to cover the topics of loyalty with us, one last question for you. Like, you know, it's my position. I love the idea of just don't waste a crisis. You know, it is a chance to do something new. It's a chance to do something completely different. We don't know what the end is like, so it's hard to start a project that could be 3 months long when tomorrow we have to be back in, you know, whatever. So it's hard to predict what's going to happen next. But when this passes, look, if it's 3 years, 5 years, 16 months, whatever, but when this passes, are you not setting yourself up for a massive disappointment when, looking back on it, we wasted the crisis and nothing changed? Will you not be very upset?
Then I will be very, yes, I will be very upset. I think it's a waste of time, and it's really sad. But I think there are those out there who are not wasting it. And like I said, I think it's the digital transformation and what is happening in our digital world right now that is going to make the change.
I have time to sneak in a quick question from Gustavo here on chat. Will the online landscape change, do you think? Or will it be the same kind of channels as usual? Will there be new ways of booking that we haven't seen before?
I think there will be new ways of booking that we haven't seen. I really personally hope it's going to be much more customer centric. Right. And of course, there's going to be consolidation. We're already seeing that happening. There's those who are capitalizing on the situation, and you will see that. But I think that the changes in technology that we're seeing, I mean, we're literally working remote all over the world right now. And I mean, not that long ago, I left the company that I was working for just because they didn't allow a remote working policy. And so the digital landscape is kind of forcing us to change. Absolutely.
And Cederhall, thank you so much for joining us. We're about 10 minutes to the top of the hour. We're going to stay live until 4 p.m. Dublin time here. On the call, I'm going to bring in, at the very last minute, one of the most patient ladies in travel technology, Madeleine Anderson. Thank you so much for joining us on the live show from Travel Massive. Madeleine, your space is loyalty. These are the dynamics of how you earn points for your behavior and how you can spend them with airlines. It's a huge part of the business. Just to explain it I think in your own language, just to gloss over some of the details very quickly. When you get a credit card, for example, from American Express, and you earn points for your spending with them, American Express buy those points from the airline for cash. It sits on the income statement, the profit and loss of the airline, then eventually for a certain amount of time, and then they grant them to you. But it is a type of currency, it's a type of asset. And that's a huge source of funding for airlines, isn't it?
Yes, I agree with you completely, Kevin. I think for a lot of airlines, if you look at the partners that they work with in their loyalty schemes and outside of the loyalty schemes, co-brand are generally the areas that generate the most revenue.
That's when the bank and the airline will brand the same credit or debit card for the customer.
Exactly. So you'll see the branding of both on there.
And that's a huge sector. It is absolutely massive. We don't really know how big it is until we attend one of Michael Smith's conferences, where we might find yourself, of course. But it's absolutely massive business. It's a great source of revenue for airlines. It keeps them profitable in some cases. You know, it is a pseudo currency, and it is pre-bought. Is there not a case to be made that airlines could use this as a quick and scrappy way to stay afloat in tough times like this, to just pre-sell a whole load of points in advance?
I think there's several elements to that. Firstly, would the issuing banks want to buy them at the moment? If you look at the model, the economic model around co-brand cards, the way that the money is earned is basically down to the number of card holders, the amount they're spending, interchange, which essentially is the transaction fee that is charged to merchants. So those are the key components. In terms of the points element part, you get points. The airline will sell points to the card company for sign-up bonuses, for points on spend, and for promotions as well.
So a bank would use this as a weapon for a marketing perspective. They would use this as a way to entice customers. This is what the customer wants. We'll give them 50,000 whatever points just to sign up for this new shiny gold, silver, platinum, whatever card. They'll get points in advance. Is there a worry though with nobody flying that nobody really cares about points anymore?
I would agree that the value of a travel point at the moment is nothing compared to what it has been historically, because until people start to travel again, those points are meaningless. However, there are different ways they can redeem those points, predominantly at the moment in the in the travel ecosystem. What you're seeing with some airlines, though, is they're already reducing the number of partners that people can redeem on. I would suggest that they could perhaps be looking at doing the opposite. So looking at, there are still some sectors that are making money. So how about driving new partnerships with those areas, whether it's telcos, video conferencing companies, etc. And I think there's also a nice element where historically people have been able to use orphan points towards charities. I think this is a time for gratitude. This is the time to show and to give customers the opportunity to show how they feel about, in the UK, it's the NHS. So are there different ways that we can direct those points? Now, that doesn't ultimately help the airline with their bottom line at the moment, but there's two elements. What can we do now with the points that people have. And then what can we do in the future to drive them back to traveling again? Because the great thing, sorry.
No, it's one of the points you raised earlier. For those banks that use points as part of their customer incentivization, um, it, it's not uncommon to have more than one spending card at the moment. And especially when the cards have become virtualized in electronic wallets, it's essential that the banks keep their card top of wallet, to borrow your expression. And if points don't get them top of wallet, the bank starts losing money, and the whole value of the points economy seems to diminish even further. I like what you're saying because it still gives some sort of economy to points, to show gratitude. Is anybody doing that just out of curiosity?
I'm not aware of anyone doing it yet. I think the initial focus for the airlines has been very much on cost reduction, on cash preservation, and dealing with the whole cancellation and refund arena. I think when they get their heads out of the weeds, then there's an opportunity to start thinking about actually what needs to change in the loyalty arena, what needs to change with co-brand card partners, with all of the other partners they're working with. What can we do better? What can we do more effectively? Picking up on what Anne was saying, never waste a crisis. I don't know a single organization that doesn't have an IT requirements list longer than they will ever possibly be able to deliver. So now is the time. Now is the time to improve the processes around loyalty, around the co-brand cards, around refunds. For example, if you look at what some of the airlines are doing at the moment, they are saying, yes, if I've, Virgin, for example, they cancel the flight, they will offer a full refund, but you need to ring them in order to cancel.
And it's a 45-minute wait, or God knows how long before you get to a human to do it for you, But in fairness, the systems aren't there to wrap a button around. Technically there isn't a little API you can just plug into straight away and that takes care of everything. There's probably quite a lot of, old-fashioned, to borrow the expression, commands that you need to type in order to get it to work, So it's not quite as simple as we might think technically. So you have to call a human, and that's a miserable experience.
You have to call a human some of the time, but also what some of the airlines are doing is saying, okay, we will offer you a full refund. However, if you want to change your flight, extend it, etc., you can do that online. And again, what Virgin are doing is they're looking at incentivizing people for rebooking. So, they're saying, okay, you can have an additional bonus, flying club miles if you rebook, or we'll give you a free upgrade to Economy Delight, or we'll give you a gift voucher. So they're incentivizing the right behavior. So they're...
I had a question, and
go on.
It's bloody upset me. It's just upset me, so I'm going to put it to you, Anne, because I hope you've got as strong an opinion about this as I do. It's something I hear, and it's actually something that I've figured it'd be actually a decent use of the technology, but is now the time? Sorry, I'm not even able to ask it. But is now the time to move loyalty off to a blockchain type solution? Is this the type of way to use the crisis to move things over to blockchain?
I don't think I'm necessarily the best person to answer that question. I think there are opportunities around blockchain, and I think it might work for some companies, but I don't think we're there yet.
Can loyalty be part of the recovery process? Now, I know that American Express in the past, and Timothy assures me this is public, so I hope I'm not breaking some awful NDA here, but Delta Airlines pre-sold quite a large block of points to Delta in the past. Is this a strategy airlines should be looking to, with the diminishing value of the point that we've kind of established here? with the dynamics around travel and points being an incentive. Do you think that strategy is gone, or is that something that we could chase for the time being to give airlines a bit of an economic boost?
I think it should be a strand of the strategy.
Mm.
Loyalty is incredibly important, and the key thing now is to find ways to retain it. And when people start flying again, thank them for doing that. Don't revert to just the assumption that everyone's going to revert back to their original behavior. I received an email from Aer Lingus earlier today, which was crediting me a bonus amount of miles, acknowledging that I wouldn't be able to fly during this period. And that was a nice touch. And I think, co-brand cards have the opportunity to do the same. They've bought a bulk chunk of points at the moment that they're struggling to use. So encourage them to use them to keep that relationship going, to keep that communication going with the customer. And if I see that people are looking after me during this period, then I will reward them with my loyalty going forward.
Loyalty at the moment, so is more than just points. It's behavior.
It is, absolutely.
It's something to call out just before we wrap up. Matt Walker from Likeware wrote a wonderful piece, I thought, in FocusWire yesterday on that the world is going to remember how they were treated at the moment from a loyalty perspective. So everybody knows about the pain, but it's what hoops we have to jump through. I'm going to keep the call going, but just for people that have to jump off at the top of the hour, you've been watching the live show from Travel Massive. This is our 5th episode. We talk about different reasons and different ways to survive the COVID-19 crisis as an industry. Today's episode was produced by Maria Stoyanova in Bulgaria. Ian coming in Tasmania. It's been hosted by myself, Kevin O'Shaughnessy, here in Dublin. So if you have to drop off, thank you so much for joining us. We'll stay with our guests here for another 1 or 2 minutes to go through some more questions, because I think there's still a few people that want to hang on the call. So we'll leave the live stream going and we'll include this in the podcast. So for everybody that could join us and that has to go, thank you so much for making the time. When you get back to work, make sure you share a link to this episode to your friends and your colleagues so that they can find some value in it or some comfort in hearing what everybody had to say. I think the signals from Timothy, Anne and Madeleine so far are actually quite telling of what kind of a position the industry is in, and they're worth sharing. So please take a moment to share your own thoughts and link back to this episode when you can. Madeleine, going back to it, we're in... we were talking a little bit about the case in the UK, and there's like the one thing that I've seen, and I know everybody would have an opinion on this, without working directly with it. Airlines are still flying. Flight Radar is alive with signals. It's nothing near what it used to be, but cargo rates are maybe keeping the airline business going. Maybe it's just gone up so much. So there are means to survive as an operating airline, even just in cargo operations. The belly of the plane, it's a big A330 to fill with pallets as well. What's happening in the UK around bailouts, and what's your position, and what's your read on that situation from a UK perspective?
Okay, starting off with the government position, the Chancellor has made it very clear that the airline industry is not a special case, and that each case will be considered on a case-by-case basis. So that's the starting place. The second point for me is the ownership is very diverse within the UK marketplace. So if I look at BA, for example, they're part of a Spanish company. Their dominant stakeholder is the state of Qatar. Virgin, 49% owned by a US airline. EasyJet, UK headquartered and listed, but 36% controlled by Sir Stelios, who is based in Monaco. So that just gives you a few examples. In terms
and that's
of
just the UK airlines, Timothy message just there to say like that could also be in any other market. The ownership is
is quite international and subject to those external variables. What happens when Qatar pulls out of IAG?
I don't think it'll change what happens with the UK government offering support. But in fairness to BA, they've been very clear that they are not looking for a government bailout. Now, there might be several reasons around that, but they are not looking for a bailout. Virgin have made it clear that they are looking to apply for state aid. And I think Rolls-Royce and Airbus have also started lobbying the government for them. Interestingly, they made the majority of their staff accept unpaid leave several weeks ago. However, what British Airways have done, and I was waiting throughout the day to hear if the announcement had actually come through, but what they're looking to do is to, they've grounded most of their fleet, but they're looking to put 36,000 of their staff on 80% salary. Now, that is through the government job retention scheme. Okay. So it's a different way of accessing government money. And they've already agreed, the pilots have agreed that they will take 50% of their salary during this period.
Has anybody done the math on the actual value of that to BA? What's the total paycheck amount? I wonder. It'd be interesting to do that math.
I think that's something that would be interesting to look at afterwards, most certainly.
Yeah, I think the documentaries that'll come out of this time of world development will be quite interesting. How it's all unfolded in retrospect. Another thing, though, we're at kind of a watershed moment for payment technology. Just to touch on that before we wrap up, we've seen certainly in a number of countries that the contactless limit, which used to be quite low, it used to be famously low, it was like 10, 15 euros initially. That's slowly been creeping up, and I think it's now doubled. What's going to happen to card issuers that aren't part of Google Wallet and Apple Pay, among the others, for example? Is it curtains for them in a contactless world?
Not yet, but I think it could be imminent, because what we're seeing is a change in customer behavior. The starting place is driving up use of contactless. And in countries that historically haven't used it, and I know the US is a long way behind, but I suspect it'll move up the ranks a little bit faster now. The other element is the amount that they can use on contactless. At the beginning of the week, it was £30 in the UK. That's just gone up to 45. So anything that avoids a customer having to touch anything is a good thing. Now, the best alternative to that is using their phone. So, and therefore some sort of, whether Google Wallet or whatever. And as you mentioned earlier, the challenge then is staying top of wallet. So people need to get into the wallets, but they also need to get their card at the top of that digital wallet as well.
Do you think it's Timothy, come back into the call here. I want to bring everybody in for one last round of questions anyway. But Timothy, you mentioned Wechat Pay, and for those of us who don't know Wechat Pay, it's a system where you scan a QR code, a changing QR code from a merchant. Your phone receives it, and you authorize the payment from your phone. So it's even more contactless, if you know what I mean. You can do it from a distance. Is it time, do you think, Timothy, for even more innovation in payment instruments? Do you see an even more radical shift to how we pay for things in the next few months?
I don't think it's a question of the next few months, because the infrastructure to support that, I agree with Madeleine, it's going to take a while. But let me give you a statistic, which is 75%. This is per the World Pay 2019 data. 75% of all payment transactions in Asia Pacific were not done via a credit card, nor cash. So you need to kind of look outside of, if I can use Anne's analogy, there is no box. The box no longer exists. Welcome to the new world order. Welcome to the new world. I think you have to accept that all bets are off. There is nothing that is sacred anymore at all. And one of the key issues here is, I think I can go to your point, is that the cost of payment has become the largest remaining controllable cost that an airline has. And this is something that has been ignored for a very long period of time. So when you talk about the interchange rate or the merchant discount rate, all those items have sort of crept up on these additional fees. And what we're seeing now is that instant payment, of which the Wechat Pay and Alipay represents part of the solution, these alternative forms of payment, AFPs as they're known, are now going to dominate, and they're spreading very fast in all the places except Western Europe and North America. So you see them in Africa, you see them in Latin America, and so they've spread way outside of the borders. I think there is a massive amount of savings to be had in blowing up the traditional legacy payment systems, which means that maybe I'll get my money in 3 or 4 days' time, as opposed to, what about the exchange rate? What about right now? Can I get my money now? And the issue of cash flow in the system is going to become critical.
I want to bring up a point you raised, and I'll put the question first to Madeleine, if you don't mind. But it is a time when all bets are off, like you said. Madeleine, what are the gaps and the opportunities that you see there? I mean, and it can be for anybody at any level. It could be for banks. It could be for the startups. It could be for the content creators. It could be for the airlines. But what do you see as the gaps that we should explore now? What are the main opportunities out there that are ready for the taking, in your view?
I would agree with what Timothy has said, in that now's the time to look at alternative forms of payment. You know, we've seen installment payments coming in, for example, and there are a lot of fintech innovation around that will enable different ways of paying. So I think credit cards need to look at what the opportunities are to integrate with them. You know, if you look at the likes of Revolut, which are looking to go into the US market. Now, in some cases, the banks, the issuing banks, have been integrating with fintech providers. In other instances, the fintechs have gone out on their own. So I think that's a whole area for exploration.
Alternative forms of payment. So we'll be paying differently in the future.
Yeah.
It won't be
I think
Visa and MasterCard.
but to Madeleine's point, this, where we're at now, is the significant infrastructure cost of payments has massively increased. Yet at the same time, the interchange rate has decreased. Has gone down. So you have this kind of But I think that if I can just pick up on this, this is something that we as an investment firm have identified as a huge opportunity for our investment, and we're spending an awful lot of money. We've created partnerships with people. So I spent a lot of time looking at this over the last 2 years. But I can say this, the process, the legacy processes of things like clearinghouses then play directly inside the airline space, where you look at BSP. And BSP is a big, fat chicken waiting to be plucked. It is very expensive.
And from what I've read, there's an awful big war going on between French travel agents and the BSP.
Because the overhang of unrefunded debt that was pushed through travel agents and through airlines, through the clearinghouses, is about $35 billion. That number is a very large number. And right now, the airlines are fighting desperately to hold on to that cash, because if they have to pay it out, many airlines will go bankrupt right now. So technically, I would say that many airlines are insolvent. And if I use the UK expression, which says, "Are you fit to trade?" I would say that almost every airline on the planet who uses BSP is unfit to trade. So the question of
does that mean that there's a virtual subsidy going on just by
there is absolutely
friction?
A virtual subsidy going on right now, because the airline said, you know what, don't you worry your little head about this. We'll give you free change. That was the first thing, free change, but you're only allowed one. So wait a minute. So you've canceled my flight. I get the one free change and you're not refunding my money. That's a load of horse poo. And I think that at this stage, we have to all accept that this is one area that has to be reformed. And what is interesting is whereas IATA's major funding comes from BSP. So IATA itself as an organization is going to be struggling with its own funding because it is funded significantly out of the BSP pot. I think we have to just accept these. There will be new forms of payment which have two attributes. The first one is it's cheaper, and the second one is it's faster. And that is absolutely going to happen.
And that could revolutionize the recovery, actually, when you think about it, Tony.
I think
it's amazing.
I think you're right.
Yeah. I'm going to leave you the last word, but I want to bring in Anne for her own perspective on this. What are the opportunities that we mightn't have seen yet, we mightn't have heard yet, but what are, if you're a startup or an airline or somebody in the space, wondering how not to waste the crisis, what should we be working on?
You want me to go first?
Give it a go.
Yeah. No, I think I can just summarize what I was saying. Look into the processes. Try to collaborate with those that you work together with. Airline agency space, you need to get a lot closer actually with all your partners. You need to identify, just like Madeleine said, you need to go back and look at what am I doing, why, how, and what is the cost of this? And Timothy was talking about cost of payment. There are so many other areas that is also, huge cost attached to it, and you need to revise that and start the discussions.
You mentioned reissue should feature on everybody's spring cleaning list. Is there any other areas you'd like to volunteer for?
There is a long list. I mean, the list is long, but you need to sort of also understand mid office, back office. How do the agents? How do they sell it? It's endless, and it's good to do some consulting in this space because it's a lot of fun, or it will be a lot of fun once it takes off again.
I'd say you'll have a front row seat to the fireworks display of change that comes forward, and I'm looking forward to the blog posts you put out, Anne, and of course to meeting you at a conference sometime soon. Timothy, I said I'd bring you in last because I know you'll have something long to say, if nothing else. But for me, you've mentioned a couple of seedlings so far. Is there one or two areas you think that either airlines or any other actor in the travel industry, whether they're startups or established companies, should be looking at as opportunities while we're going through the COVID crisis?
That's a very loaded question, Kevin, as your questions usually are. And you've managed to exceed your previous list of questions by at least one. So you're 50% up on our last conversation like this.
There we
go. I think that the answer has to be driven by the circumstance. And the circumstances of the situation at the moment is that the airline model is uneconomic. If I go back to my $900 billion worth of gross revenue that applied to airlines in 2019, and we see that the government bailouts right now amount to worldwide plus or minus about 61 billion. There was 61 billion in cash the airlines had, and instruments. There's a further 40 or 50. There isn't enough cash in any of the scenarios that have been put out so far to cover the cost of the airline industry. Therefore, you have to start from the basis is that all bets are off. I think we've all four of us on this conversation have said it's no longer business as usual. It's either you have to accept that something else has got to emerge. I think, therefore, you look at a slightly different view of the world that says, what would an airline look like? Instead of asking, is there an opportunity? You have to ask the question differently. What does an airline look like? Is it, if I may paraphrase Mr. O'Leary, it's a fucking bus. Is it that, or is it an instrument of national policy? I see that one of the first things that is going to happen is an extensive re-regulation. The first thing that will happen is going to be the.
And when you say that, are we talking about a new Warsaw or a new Chicago or something?
I think no, I'm talking about re-regulation, meaning everybody's going to have to get together and decide which flights go to which places. And
new
until you
route
have
negotiation.
a route authority, bring back the CAB in the US from the 70s, is highly likely. And whether that's government sanctioned or whether it's government mandated is open to debate by country. I think you must see that the scarcity of the resource at the moment is the traveling public. This is unprecedented because you have normally a variation of supply versus demand. Now you've had both of them depressed. And the only thing to do is to look at what instruments will raise one or both of them. And the only flexible item at the moment is the airline supply side, and that's just not going to work. So I think you have to look at the airline model itself has to change. There will be, I think I want to echo something
We're in a
Anne said,
2.0 situation here.
We're in a I think we're at a 5.0. We might be into the airline X of the new world, right? But one of the things that Anne said is something that we have to consider, which is what is the new form of cooperation that exists? There is something that is going to have to be different. So you can say that you look at the alliance model. The alliance model is toast in this world. There is no way that an alliance model, which was already under threat from the joint ventures, but I would also hazard a guess that some of the joint ventures and joint ownership deals are also toast.
So what you're talking about there is the Lufthansa Group and the joint business between American cross-Atlantic.
Yes, with Air Canada. Well, I would say the joint ventures, the antitrust immunities, those immunities must spread to a much broader number. I mean, already the European Commission has been very nervous about these immunized relationships. And they have, it's a bit like once you agree to one, you agree to a whole lot, which is what has happened. Those immunized relationships must now be opened up so that everybody is immunized, because from now on, there is, if you want to go from Seattle to Ouagadougou, you can only go there one way. There is not going to be a whole lot of choice. And if I want to go to Minot, North Dakota, that is going to be a place that I'm going to have to be able to go there using only perhaps one pathway. So I think you've got to consider that in this framework, going back to your original question, is there an opportunity? I would say there are many opportunities, but you have to start at the beginning, which is acceptance of the fact that there is a new world order and this new model which will emerge in, let's say, 18 months.
And when you see that, it'll be clear where the new gaps are, where the new opportunities are, where the new partnerships are being called for.
Yeah, I mean, as an investment firm, as an investor, we're looking very hard at those opportunities. We're looking at distressed assets, which is something that we do as a matter of course in our business. And we're looking at places where things can go. I just think that at this stage, there is no clear opportunity, nor is there a clear, as you call them, the green shoots. Those are not clear. I think if you follow my 7 stages to the new model, I think you're going to have to accept that many of the assumptions upon which most innovation has been made up until this point are no longer valid.
Timothy, on that note, I'm going to thank all 3 of you for hanging on for some extra time, some extracurricular chat on our 1 hour, which has turned into a 1.5 hour show today. Thank you so much for joining us. Timothy O'Neill Dunn, Madeleine Anderson, and Anne Cederhall, thank you for being part of Travel Massive's live show today. The show's title was Grounded, produced by Maria Stoyanova from Bulgaria and with the support of Ian Cumming in Tasmania, and hosted by myself, Kevin O'Shaughnessy, here in Dublin. If you'd like to take part, or you think that somebody else should take part on this show, please reach out to us. It's live@travelmassive.com. But for the time being, and for everybody that did take part and that hung on, thank you so much for being a good sport. This is the live show. Thank you for being part of something massive. Thank you.